This is Unit 10, Taxonomy, and Section 1, History of Life on Earth. Based on carbon dating and other kinds of examination of rock layers, we have dated the Earth to be 4.6 billion years old. And we have found multitudes of cell types at different rock layers and have been able to date life back to about 4 billion years ago is when the first cells seem to have appeared. Those first cells were all prokaryotes, which means they didn't have a nucleus, and they were very, very simple types of organisms. Over time, we find through our fossil evidence that life became much more complex. The cells developed a nucleus, they started developing organelles like the mitochondria and things like that, until life became so diverse that this is the Earth we know today. There have been mass periods of extinction where a huge number of species die off, but then life always comes back in new ways with new species becoming dominant on the planet. So one example is the dinosaurs, which are all reptiles, and when they died off, of course, there are some reptiles that still stayed around, like alligators and crocodiles and things, but mammals became a dominant species because they were much more capable of surviving in the new climate that was present after that time. So those early cells we know are prokaryotes and heterotrophs. So they ate different kinds of chemicals and things like that. And then about 3 billion years ago is when we find the first cells that were able to do photosynthesis. And that changed the gases on Earth. As soon as photosynthetic cells came about, there was more oxygen available on Earth, and that made way for more complex life forms. This little clock over here is what would be the history of life on Earth if it were boiled down to 24 hours. So here at midnight is the formation of the Earth. And then, so this is in billions of years. So at about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock is when the first prokaryotes are seen. And so there's obviously millions of years where it was life on Earth was not possible. It was too hazardous, and the planet was not yet formed fully yet. And then notice how much time spans in between that and then oxygen being put in the environment by those photosynthetic organisms. The first eukaryote cells emerge. First animals, plants move to land, not until up here. Plants were mainly waterborne before. First flowers, that means like sexual reproduction was really starting to happen right about there. And then the first humans were at 11:59 and 40 seconds p.m. We really haven't been around that long. Humans have been around for about 2 million years. The big question is, how did those eukaryotes develop from a prokaryotic cell? And the main theory is called the endosymbiosis theory, which is the idea that one prokaryote engulfed another, and that prokaryote became a nucleus. There's a lot of evidence for this. If we look at the nucleus and what is in it, it's a double membrane organelle, just like the cell membrane of a cell. And then it has a lot of structural features that are very similar to a prokaryotic cell. Okay, other things that have came up over time, sexual reproduction. Obviously, the first cells were asexual reproducers. Cell specialization, which means an organism would maybe have different kinds of tissues that do different things, unlike just the unicellular organisms. And then that allowed more complex forms of life to become available. Okay, so then we're going to just move right into section 2, which is, okay, now that we have all of this diversity, what do we do with it all? So there was a period in our history where explorers were going all over the world and collecting different species from the things that they found, and they were bringing them all back to basically to England. And they were trying to figure out where did all these species come from? What should we call them? And obviously, in every single home country, they had their own names for things. So in China, they had Chinese names for all of the species in their area. So there was no universal system for naming anything. So there is highly possible that there could be a Chinese name for something and a Russian name for the same exact species because those two countries are right next to each other. So they were based on those unique names and then obviously based on descriptor words, adjectives on what they saw. So scientists realized that there was a need for a universal system. And the person who came up with that system was Carl Linnaeus, or Carolus Linnaeus, and he came up with a system called binomial nomenclature, which literally means two-name name system, so that every single species would be given a genus and species name that would tell you something special about them, and then the genus name would kind of tell you what group they're in. So it kind of groups them all together. Okay, so according to the Linnaean system, the genus is going to be the first part of your scientific name, and it's usually capitalized, and it's going to be the same as all others in that group. So for example, the genus Ursa means bear. So all of the bears, the black bears, grizzly bears, are going to be in this genus. And the species name should be more specific. It should tell you something about that individual species. And so that's going to actually be lowercase and more of an adjective, usually a color or a region. So your genus and species gives you the scientific name, and you would be able to point that out in any kind of text because it would be italicized. They're going to have to be in Latin because that is a scientific language. And the first letter of the genus is capital and the species is lower. So for example, our scientific name is Homo sapien. We are of the Homo genus, and the sapien means thinkers or intelligent. So that is describing our species. There is a lot of misnaming names when you just look at regular common names. So it is very important to have a scientific name that is based on like DNA evidence and other relationship evidence instead of just what it looks like. So here's just a couple examples of animals that are named the wrong thing. Okay, so the taxa are groups of organisms that are based on the same anatomical structures, basically. And there's a hierarchy of taxa. So, for example, we have different kingdoms. We have 6 different kingdoms. And that is going to take all living things on the planet and put them in one of the 6 kingdoms. And then from kingdom, we can put them in phylums. And the phylums are going to tell us, okay, do you have a backbone or not? Or something special about that particular group. Okay, so that basically allows us to group things that are very similar together in groups called taxa. So for example, to be part of the animal kingdom, you have to have eukaryotic cells, you have to be a heterotroph, and no cell wall. That's all it takes to be in the animal kingdom. So here's the category. So we start with the kingdom. There's 6 of those. And then the phylum really depends on what kingdom you're talking about. But for the animal kingdom, this would be, do you have a backbone or not? The class for animals, we are in the mammal class. That has to do with how we reproduce, the fact that we produce milk. Our order would be primates, which would put us with other animals that have opposable thumbs and brain sizes the same as ours. Family is the hominids, which means we walk upright. Genus is Homo, and our species is Sapien. So we can look at us as a species and be able to kind of group us at different levels with different things. You are going to have to know these in order. So one of our mnemonic devices is King Philip came over for good soup, and that should help you remember that. Okay, so the kingdom is going to be the broadest, and then it's going to narrow all the way down to species. Okay, so obviously there's many, many, many different animals in the animal kingdom, but there's only one Homo sapien, so it's narrowing it down to be more specific. So here you can see, here's the animal kingdom. It has everything from that cheetah down to the jellyfish. The phylum, this is the chordate phylum, so things without a backbone all leave, the sponges and the jellyfish. The classes, this is the mammal class, so the reptiles, fish, and frogs and birds get out of there. Then the order, this is talking about the cats here, so this is the cat order, or the carnivore order. And then the family is the big cats, and the genus and the species until you end up with that specific leopard species. So there's lots of different things you can look at to classify your skeletal system, whether the skeleton's on the inside or outside, backbone or no. Reproductive system, do you lay eggs, we have live birth, are the eggs fertilized on the inside of the body or outside? Circulatory system, are you warm-blooded or cold-blooded? Do you have a larva stage in between, like a frog would have a tadpole stage, or insects have a larva stage? So here you can see just the differences in the animal kingdom between an invertebrate and a vertebrate. Exoskeleton versus endoskeleton. It's going to change a lot of things. External fertilization, like a fish, they do spawning, and then internal, be a mammal like an elephant. You lay eggs or give live birth. Cold-blooded or warm-blooded, which is heterotherm or homeotherm. Can you maintain your body temperature? How do you reproduce? Okay, and then one other category that has been added is called the domain, and basically that's taking all different types of cells basically and putting them into 3 categories. So the archaea are actually ancient bacteria, and we did not know about these ancient bacteria until very recently, about how extreme they can be. So they are in their own category because they usually eat chemicals, they live in toxic environments. And then there's the bacteria, those ones that are making you sick, that's stuff in your yogurt and all over. And then the eukarya are everything else. So this is the plants, the fungi, and the animals all together in the eukarya branch. So domain is higher than kingdom, basically.